Most financial advice assumes you're ready for the next level. But what if you're not behind? You're just building the wrong thing at the wrong time. Today, we're unpacking wealth capacity, the missing link between good advice and real peace with money. Stay with me. This will change how you decide.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Do.Different.Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, CEO and founder of Social Impact Now, Connective Institute, and Do Different Better, and managing partner for the Integrated Capital Fund. And to everyone who's listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, I'm so glad you're here. And if you're just now joining us, we are going to be talking about wealth capacity and where money decisions feel heavier when your foundation isn't quite built yet. I'm going to be talking about what I call the soul framework, and I'm going to talk to you all about what that is and what it looks like, right? So, if this is your first time here, I'm so glad you're here. And I hope that you're going to get a lot of great information that you are going to be finding really, really useful in your life. And if you've been rocking with me for a while, you already know we don't do generic money advice around here. So, just going a little bit deeper about wealth capacity, it's not hustle, it's not hacks, and it's certainly not hype. And if at any point you think, wow, she's putting words to something I felt, but I just couldn't explain, that's not an accident. So, don't forget to subscribe on the YouTube channel, Do Different Better, because this episode is one you'll want to revisit, clip, and share. But first, let me start with a confession. If you've ever listened to financial advice and thought, okay, but which one am I actually supposed to do? You're not confused. You're actually paying attention because the truth is, most financial advice sounds perfectly reasonable right up until the time you try to apply it in your actual life. You might hear things like save more, invest early, buy assets, buy a business, avoid debt, use leverage, right? Whatever that might mean, right? Maximize returns, protect your downside. What downside? Optimize your taxes, right? At some point, it starts to feel less like guidance and more like a very long, exhaustive to do list written by someone who knows nothing about you, your circumstances, and where you're trying to go, and your calendar, your responsibilities, and quite frankly, your nervous system, right? And we talked about that in the previous episode, talking about wealth identity. Your wealth identity directly impacts your wealth capacity. And if you ever responded to all of that advice by thinking, honestly, I just want to lie down for a minute. This is all too much. I can't take it in. Welcome. You're among friends and family. So let's get a little bit more clear about what's going on. Here is what's happening. And this is super, super, super important. Most financial advice is not necessarily wrong. It's just really incomplete. It delivers as if everyone is starting from the same place, has stable income, has predictable expenses, has emotional bandwidth, or has margin for trial and error, which is at best optimistic. Financial advice tends to live in a world where emergencies are hypothetical, family obligations are optional, burnout is a mindset issue, and time is endlessly flexible or infinitely available. Meanwhile, real people, including myself, are trying to make decisions while they're juggling careers. They're caregiving, they're dealing with their own health concerns or issues. They have maybe community obligations. and the low grade anxiety of living in a very expensive world, particularly when you get out to some of the coast, right? So if financial advice feels overwhelming, contradictory, or exhausting, that's not necessarily a personal failure. This is a systems failure, right? And here's the trap that a lot of people fall into, and I was a victim as well. They're doing all the right things. They're earning a good living, right? They're saving money. They're investing. Maybe they have a 401k even. They're reading the books. They're listening to the podcast. They're learning. And yet something still feels off. They don't feel clear. They don't feel confident. They don't feel settled. Instead, they, maybe you, feel like you're constantly behind an invisible syllabus that you're still waiting to be delivered. That's because the right things without understanding sequence creates pressure instead of progress. It's like trying to build a house by starting with the roof, because that's the part everyone posts picture of, right? The finished product. And that's not how reality works, right? So, this is especially true as you start to move through different socioeconomic classes. Maybe you become more, maybe you've gotten a significant, a high earner. High earners live with a specific kind of financial tension. On paper, you might be doing really, really well, but internally, you are carrying a lot, right? You're managing more complex decisions. You're managing higher expectations. You're managing higher visibility and feeling like you have less room to make mistakes. And that even can be with your partner, right? This feeling of constantly being judged and or trying to live up to some unsaid expectation, or maybe it was actually directly said to you. You know, you're in this neighborhood, you're in this house, you're driving that kind of car. You should be at this particular investment level. You should be doing these particular types of investing activities. So when advice says, well, since you earn more, you should be doing X, it really skips a very important question. At what cost? Because earning more money does not automatically mean that your life is stable, that your income is predictable, your responsibilities are light, or that your risk tolerance is high. I shared with you all a little bit about the story in previous episodes about how I was acquiring a business. And what I'm not sure I shared with you all was literally throughout the whole entire buying process, which was a 6-month process, me and my partner were going through due diligence. The concerns that my partner had in purchasing this business, as we would talk through these concerns, I kept having to say, it is clear that I have a higher tolerance of risk than you do. And because some of the questions that were coming up in purchasing the business was some of the ambiguity, which I didn't think was going to be a problem because this was somebody who had their own business for over 20 years and had been through the 2008 crisis. They had been through the 2020 crisis, COVID, and they sold their business to the employees. So I'm like, this is somebody who's kind of survived these ups and downs. Clearly, they understand like how this all works. But at the end of the day, their capacity, while this person had a very, they sold their business, so they had a very great safety net. They also had a 401k plan as they had invested in the 20 years that they had been in working in the business. They also had a partner that had a job at a Fortune 500 company. So it wasn't that they weren't well off, but definitely their risk tolerance for both of them was super, super low in trying to maintain that lifestyle, trying to maintain the life that they had created, right? So let me say this clearly. Income does not equate to readiness, right? In any regard. And treating it like it does is how people end up stressed, overextended, and quietly anxious, even though they're doing well, right? So, it's super, super important to make sure that we uncouple doing well with actually being at a certain investment level or certain level of financial acumen, right? You at that level, you're probably an expert in the thing that you're an expert in. Maybe you're a marketing professional, maybe you're a doctor, maybe you're a lawyer, maybe you're a software engineer. Maybe you are in the finance department of a particular big company. You are an expert in that thing. You're not necessarily, that does not translate that you have the capacity or capability to make decisions in this other part of your life. So think of it this way. Just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you can be a carpenter, right? Just because you're a doctor does not necessarily mean that you know how to landscape, right? Those are two very different skills, and you would not expect necessarily for somebody who comes from one particular background to automatically be able to do something else. Well, the same is true here. But the expectation is because you have this high level of um, knowledge or skill set around a particular thing that you should be able to know a certain level of a topic like finance better than you do. And that's simply not the case. So I'm hoping that if you take nothing away from this, that you begin to uncouple not only for yourself, but your expectation of other people, that because they have a reputation, because they have a skill set that leads them to have a certain kind of job or career or standing, that does not necessarily translate to being able to make different kinds of financial decisions or any financial decisions for that matter. So this is where and why we need a new lens. The concept that's missing from most money conversations is financial capacity. Capacity is your ability to hold a financial strategy without chaos somewhere else in your life, like without creating chaos somewhere else in your life. It's not about intelligence. It's not about discipline. It's not even about income. It's really about how much volatility you can absorb, how much uncertainty can you tolerate, how much complexity your life can actually support, and how much margin you actually have. Capacity is the difference between a strategy that feels empowering and the same strategy feeling suffocating. And those are two completely different things and will show up differently for different people. So now let's talk about why capacity matters. Here's the thing that most people don't realize until they're already super, super stressed, maybe overstressed. Strategies don't fail in isolation. They actually fail in context. The same investment, the same debt, the same business move can feel completely different depending on whether you have cash reserves, whether your income fluctuates, whether you're supporting other people, whether your life already feels stretched, right? And if you're listening to the previous episode, you might hear correlations to that here. Without enough capacity, even good moves feel heavy. With enough capacity, even imperfect moves feel manageable. That's why some people take risk and sleep fine. I'm one of those people, although I wasn't always one of those people, while others take smaller risk and feel constantly on edge. Same world, different capacity. So you can start to see, I hope you're starting to get the wheels turning and seeing how this all ties together. When people ignore their capacity, three things usually happen. One is they overbuild. They take on too much way too fast. Second, they second guess everything, right? That was what I was experiencing with my partner. Every decision feels like it could be the wrong one. And third, they blame themselves. They assume the problem is discipline or mindset. And more likely it's not. There are some instances where it is, but oftentimes it's not. The problem is not that no one told them what they were actually building. So here's a quick pause if this is landing for you. I have on my website, www.Do.Different.Better.com, you can take a quiz to find out and get insight into what is your wealth identity. Very soon here, you're going to be able to also get your wealth capacity on the website as well. And so you can take a quiz, take some questions, and you'll be able to identify what your wealth identity is, what your wealth capacity is, and what are some things that you can do today to do that. And I'll have some other resources on the website as well. But if this is resonating with you at all, share this episode with someone who's doing all the right things, but still seems to feel financially tense. Maybe that's your partner. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe it's a sibling. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It helps the conversation reach people who actually need it. All right. So, but let's get back to closing down this particular segment, right? So here's what you're going to do in this episode. I'm going to walk you through 4 types of financial capacity, okay? Not because you need all 4 at once. You don't, all right? And not because there's a right timeline. That's not the goal here, right? We're trying to get data. We're trying to get clear. It's because knowing which capacity is you're building right now changes everything on how every financial decision is going to feel. I call this framework SOLE, SOLE, because just like a house needs a solid foundation, wealth needs a soul before it can stand. Then briefly, I'm going to name, so here are there's stability, optionality, leverage, and embodiment. That's it. I'm not going to give you definitions just yet, but this does 3 things for you. So I hope that this is going to allow you to get some clarity. It's going to allow you to be able to have a way to have a conversation with your significant other in your life, but also it's now going to lay the groundwork for you to be able to think about what are the decisions that you need to make. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this. And so I am going to get into this into segment 2. Stay with me and I will see you after the break. Alrighty, my financiers, welcome back to the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. In the first segment, we talked about why financial advice feels overwhelming and why that's not necessarily your fault. Now I want to give you language, structure, a way to tell what you're actually building. And this is where the SOLE, SOLE framework that I designed comes in. Because wealth needs a soul before it can stand. Now, and the first 2 I'm going to talk about the first 2 wealth capacities, and that's going to be stability and optionality. These are the ones that people rush past the fastest and regret skipping the most. And it's really interesting because I also see how this applies it really shows up in people's businesses when people are sitting in these wealth capacities and then they go and start a business. The way that they start making decisions about their business you really get to see very clearly how they start to leapfrog over some very, very important things and they just keep going. And even though you pointed out to them, they just don't want to see it, right? But that's not going to be you. That's not going to be you. So first, let's start with stability. Stability is not about being rich. And I think, I keep talking about the first episode and how I talked about my self-discovery of understanding what wealth meant. And that when I finally understood from my perspective, what wealth meant, it meant that I didn't have to look at my bank account every single day, right? Which is what I was doing. But because I started saving money and I now I had emergencies that I was able to deal with as a result of me putting that money away. I'm like, wealth is for me safety. Wealth for me is sustainability, that I am going to be okay and I don't have to check my bank account to deal with an emergency. I know I've got the money and I can write the check or the credit card or whatever to be able to take care of whatever I need to take care of. That was my definition. So once again, stability is not necessarily about being rich. It's about being unshaken, which was what I felt in that moment. I was like, oh, I can write this check for this emergency. And and it felt so good because I'd never felt that, I don't think, in my entire life, especially as somebody who grew up housing insecure most of my life. It was such a great feeling to be like, oh, I want more of this, right? Stability means your bills don't surprise you. Your income is reasonably predictable. A minor emergency doesn't turn into a crisis. Your nervous system isn't constantly on edge. This is the capacity that allows you to exhale. And here's the part that people don't like hearing. If your life is volatile, every financial decision feels even heavier than it should. I saw this a lot happen with my mom. My mom was very hyper triggered by her wealth capacity. And I got to see her, how she would second guess things. She would hesitate. She would overthink. And these are all characteristics, right? Not because that she was indecisive, but because her system was already stressed with dealing with some of the things that we were having to deal with in my family. Stability gives you rhythm. It gives you a level of predictability, and it definitely gives you a level of psychological safety. And yes, that includes things like emergency buffers, simplified accounts, fewer financial fires, right? And ones you're not causing. This is another thing that I see show up a lot of times with people, like people causing their own financial emergencies because they have either no self-control or they have no discernment about the well has a bottom, right? For lack of a better term. And no, none of this is sexy, right? But all of it is foundational. And you cannot out invest in stability, right? And I talk a lot about that with my business owners, right? So what now does that mean, right? A lot of high earners, professionals, people in what are considered solid careers. I'm talking about nurses. I'm talking about bookkeepers, accountants, consultants. Right? A lot of you say, "Oh, I'll circle back to stability once I grow more, once I get to this number." But here's the hard truth: growth without stability actually increases your fragility. If your income rises, but your life stays chaotic, you don't feel wealthier. You just feel more exposed to something bad happening, which then levels up your nervous system, right? And then you're crashing out, right? Stability isn't a delay. It's actually a prerequisite. So, if this framework is helping you reframe your own situation, I want you to do something for me. I'd love for you to go to Do.Different.Better.com. I definitely want you to check out the wealth capacity quiz, see where you are. But I'm also trying to provide you with more resources that you can keep learning without feeling overwhelmed. No spam, I promise you, no pressure, just some tools for you to be able to take what you're hearing on the show and beginning to impart that into your life by having worksheets or other kinds of things to read to be able to help you make better goals and make better decisions that feel aligned with your capacity at the moment to get to your next level of capacity, right? Now, once stability is in place, we move to optionality. That's our next wealth capacity. Optionality is your ability to choose without panic. It's margin. And here's what it looks like. It looks like having cash reserves. It looks like having time flexibility. It is having liquidity. And remember, we talked about liquidity is your availability or your access, quick access to your assets that then can convert to cash, and typically within 30 days, right? So maybe it's stocks, but it's something that you have that you can convert to cash in a relatively short period of time. But it also provides you with the ability to wait. Optionality is what lets you say, not yet, or that's not for me. That does not mean that it's not a good opportunity. Let me be clear. It's just that it's not for you right now. It allows you to be able to have the opportunity to say, I can afford to pass on this opportunity. Because I also say this, opportunities are not always opportunities. Some opportunities are actually tests. It is to test your resolve on the decision that you said that you wanted to make or the goal that you set for yourself. And it's really a distraction. It's to see whether or not you're going to stay on track or you are going to follow the shiny object down off the track, right? And this is where power quietly begins to reside. But here's the twist: too much optionality too early can actually create paralysis. When everything is possible, but nothing feels anchored, people tend to freeze and do absolutely nothing. They don't make the decision. I think as I was talking to people after the Do Different Better Live, I talked to some people who had told me that they were going to come and participate. And I wanted to follow up with them like, well, why didn't you participate? They were stuck here. They were like, well, you know, I felt frozen. I felt like it wasn't for me. And I'm like, I invited you. Why would you think that I would invite you to something that isn't for you? Right? But that's why optionality must come after stability and not before it. You've got to be stable before you can actually then practice optionality. And here's the crazy thing: some people are actually in optionality, but their mindset is still in um, it's instability, right? They're actually thinking that they're still in stability, but they're really not. But their mindset is still stuck there. They haven't actually gone through the process to be able to move into optionality. And these wealth capacities are movable, they're not permanent in any way, shape, form, or fashion, right? So, for you might have heard the term Henrys, which is high earner, not rich yet. Those are called Henrys. For Henrys, especially, and these are professionals again, nurses, people, people in construction who might have their own business. This could be doctors, this could be lawyers, this could be accountants. For Henrys, especially, optionality often shows up as having too many types of accounts, all different kinds of accounts, too many strategies, and too many smart ideas. And instead of freedom, you get fatigue. Optionality works when it's intentional, when it's built to support your life, not distract from it. So, in the next segment, I'm going to talk about what happens when people jump from optionality straight into leverage and why that's where things begin to get expensive. You're listening to AM 950, and this is the Do Different Better Show. In our final segment, we're going to be talking about leverage, alignment, and embodiment, and why more money doesn't automatically mean more peace. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. This is the part of the conversation where people usually want to take shortcuts and where I'm going to slow us down on purpose. Let's talk about leverage alignment and what wealth looks like when it actually fits your life. If stability is about safety and optionality is about choice, then leverage is about influence. This is the part of the wealth conversation people rush towards because it looks like progress. But leverage is not a shortcut. It's actually an amplifier, right? So think about, a lever system, right? The whole idea behind a lever is that you actually get more power than if you were just going to lift something on your own. Leverage is when your money starts working beyond your labor. It includes investing, ownership, businesses, real assets, real estate, and strategic debt. Leverage is powerful and it is unforgiving because leverage doesn't create capacity, it actually reveals it. If your foundation is shaky, leverage magnifies stress. If your optionality is thin, leverage feels like pressure. This is why two people can make the same investment and have two completely different experiences. One may feel very empowered, and the other feels trapped. Same move, different soul. So I said in the earlier segment that the deal that my partner and I and the business that we were looking to buy, we actually had a conversation literally before the day before, 2 days before we were going to sign. It was a Saturday. We had a conversation just to prepare for the signing of the purchase agreement of this business. Now, again, we'd been working on this for 6 months, and we had gotten to the place now where we're like getting into these final details. And she had brought some concerns to me. And I could tell that she was feeling trapped. And so I said, okay, well, we're going to sign paperwork on Monday. This was the weekend. I said, why don't we go ahead and fulfill the purchase agreement, and let's then immediately refinance to get you out of the deal, but also let's find another person to buy you out. So we would have these two strategies. I thought that we solved the problem. And she called me the next day and said she wanted out of the purchase of the business, right? So once again, we were both making an investment into the same company. We'd both gone through all the due diligence to buy this company. And at the very last minute, what felt great to me, it felt like we had done all the due diligence. We had come up with a plan. We had a 90-day plan of what we were going to do with the business in the first 90 days. And still, with all of that, we'd mitigated all the risk. The seller was going to be doing a lot of the financing, and the financing was contingent on revenue and sales. So we de-risked the purchase as much as I thought that we possibly could. And even with all of that, this person didn't feel comfortable. And so they backed out of the deal, which, yes, was frustrating. But to my point, same investment, same information, but we were coming into it from a very different perspective, right? I was really coming from a leverage perspective, and I think she was coming from an optionality perspective, which then meant this deal was never going to work. And even if we'd gone through with the deal, we probably would have had a lot of issues once we got into the company. So while it was disappointing, I was glad that we ended the deal before we actually got into the deal, as opposed to getting into the deal and having to butt up against her wealth capacity versus my wealth capacity, because I'm sure it would have had a lot of friction that could have ended what was a very long friendship, right? So high earners or professionals often qualify leverage before they're ready for it. The bank will say yes to them. An advisor will say yes to them. A spreadsheet might even give them the thumbs up. But in their body, it says, I don't feel okay. That is the signal. And clearly, that's the signal that my partner got. She was not okay in her body, right? Or her partner's body, right? Because I think that was actually more influential, that her partner didn't feel comfortable about any of this whatsoever from day one. The partner wasn't okay with any of this, right? They said that they were, but they really weren't. But understanding that hum that's happening in your body or in your brain or in the back of your mind, or the tingling in your ears or the tickle in your chest, those are all signals. Leverage without capacity leads to overextending, right? Decision fatigue, and a quiet resentment, not only towards money, but what could have turned out as a resentment towards me or towards other people that you're engaged with. Leverage works best when it's built on steadiness and not urgency, right? and clarity, right? That's another important piece of this. So, this brings us to the final capacity in our soul framework, and that is embodiment. Embodiment is alignment lived. It's when your money decisions match your values, match your season of your life, reduce, not increase your cognitive load. Embodiment looks like fewer accounts, clearer purpose, saying no without guilt or shame, choosing sustainability over constant optimization. Alignment isn't just a vibe, it's actually a practice. And embodiment is how alignment shows up in real life. And that is so important because it brings another degree of clarity that allows you to integrate or exit or participate or not participate and know like you are making those kinds of choices. And I just find that it's so valuable and important to just really understand that the more you can get clear about what it is you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, what you must do, what you're going to work on. Again, this is a journey. It is not a destination, right? So I don't want you to look at this as um, these are all limitations. This is all, again, information for you to kind of get some clarity about like, oh, this is how I might be approaching these. And this is might be where the friction might be happening between me and my business partner, between me and my living partner, between me and my coworkers, between me, especially in your job. And if your job has to deal with money, maybe you're the bookkeeper, maybe you're the accountant, or maybe you're the salesperson and you're like, why don't we take this risk? Why don't we take on this client not knowing and understanding what the implications might be? Think about how this might be showing up in other parts of your life. Because I'm just going to guess that this isn't just isolated to your financial decisions. This isn't just isolated to how you think about and what your relationship is to money. Your relationship with money also is going to color how you show up in other places that have to do with money, right? So if it's your job to be a salesperson, you might be in a different capacity than your manager. And your manager might have lots of fears and concerns about making budget or making, whatever the case may be is. And so if you're a high risk person because you're like, hey, my life is stable, I've created some optionality, I can leave this job if I want to leave this job, and your coworker or your manager are not in the same position, that might be where some of the friction might be caused, and like you wanting to be a lot more experimental in some of the things that you do in your job, or the types of clients that you go after, or how much time you spend on these new markets of clients that you're trying to pursue. This is how it all starts to show up in other aspects of your life that seemingly have nothing to do with your personal finances, right? But it really has to do with how do you think about all of these things and where are you sitting as far as being able to like the optionality in your job, the stability of your home. I shared with you all, I grew up in a very unstable household. We were very housing insecure. We had been evicted from our home several times throughout my youth. And so as I got into adulthood, that was the single most important thing to me, was like making sure that I had stable housing, which meant like I paid my rent before I paid any other bills. And I would not pay bills if it was going to be at the impact of paying rent. And you say, hey, Elaine, well, duh, that makes sense. But it doesn't always, right? If you are coming from that kind of background where you have that kind of instability, like, and there was only one time in my life where I remember I borrowed money from a friend. And because I had known this friend like since like junior high school, it was the one time it was more important for me to pay him back this money because I didn't want our relationship to be ruined over money than me paying my rent. So I paid him before I paid my rent, but I paid my rent. I never had to worry about being in any sort of bad situation. But I say all this once again to bring it home to you of like being able to understand and know like how your wealth identity, which we talked about in the last episode, and how your wealth capacity work together and show up in how you make your goals, how you make your decisions, how you interact with your partner, and how you grow and scale your wealth capacity, your portfolio, in whatever that means to you. And once again, I'm not saying that your goal should be to acquire mass amounts of wealth, although if that's your goal, that's your goal. But the whole idea is whatever your goal is. It doesn't matter if your goal is to live abroad half the year. It doesn't matter if your goal is to live in a different state every 4 months. Whatever those goals are, that we are creating alignment and systems and opportunities that actually create a system by which that is whatever your goal is actually can be made possible, right? That's where we're trying to go. That is actually the situation that I want you to sit with and figure out. And once again, this might require you to just take a moment, maybe go sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and start to replay some scenarios in your mind of conversations you've had with friends, with family, with partner, and just start to sit and notice what's happening and what seems to land or resonate with you. How are you thinking about approaching these financial decisions? Where do you think your story is influencing, your identity is influencing how you show up in the world or how you approach your goals? And now let's look at the goals that you've done over the last several years. Are they misaligned with where you are? Are you in stability and your goals were set at the leverage stage? I just want you to kind of sit, right? Maybe go to a coffee shop, maybe go to the library and just kind of sit. Maybe listen to some music, but just kind of sit with all of these questions. And I encourage you to write down your answers. There's something about writing down what you're thinking and what you're feeling and putting it away and maybe pulling it out a week from now, pulling it out 2 weeks from now, pulling it out a month from now, and just kind of reflecting like, oh, wow, I had forgotten that I thought that. I had forgotten that that was the lens, and now I actually have a different lens. Or have I doubled down on the lens that I already wrote about or that I already talked about? So it's really good to. I'm not saying you got to write a whole novel, but even just like a paragraph of what's coming up for you. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you scared of? What are you angry about? What are you frustrated at? What excites you? What makes you happy? What would make you happier? Right? What is the expectations that you might be thinking about your partner? What are you imagining is your partner's wealth identity? What are you imagining your partner's wealth capacity is? And is that causing friction or is that causing synchronicity between you and your relationship with your partner? So I'm hoping that all of this is maybe giving you some language that is helpful for you to think about in not only how you can have conversations with your partner, but conversations with yourself. Maybe it's conversations with your siblings, particularly maybe you're caretaking for your parents. They're at the end of their life. Or there is some financial decisions that are related to your parents. If you can get a better idea of how you and your siblings are coming to the conversation, it might help for less acrimonious or less tension in some of the conversations that you all might have around expenses related to the last things that might have to be done with your parents, whether there's an inheritance or piece of property or something like that you all need to divide. If you can all have a better understanding of what you're bringing to the conversation, because just because you grew up in the same household does not mean you have the same wealth identity, does not mean you have the same wealth capacity. Again, so having a framework, I hope you share this with them, share this with your partner, and ask them to just think about, where are you sitting? What resonated for you? What landed for you? What didn't land for you? And that might help you have some better conversations to resolve or build the things that you're actually trying to move towards. So, in closing, here's the takeaway I want you all to sit with. You don't need all four capacities at once. I highly discourage it, as a matter of fact. You need to know which one you are building to right now. And that is how you stop chasing. That is how you reduce the noise. That is how wealth starts to feel steady instead of stressful. Wealth isn't built by doing more. It's built by building the right capacity in the right order for where you are. That's the soul way. As we wrap up, here's what I want you to take with you. You don't necessarily need to do more with your money, although you can. You need to build the right capacity in the right order. If this episode has helped you see your finances in any different way, Please subscribe on YouTube. Help me get to 1,000 subscribers by my birthday in March. This will be my birthday present to me that you all are going to give me. Definitely follow me on Instagram at Do Better with Elaine, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Elaine Rasmussen. I'm the only brown Elaine Rasmussen. You can always stay connected on Do.Different.Better.com. And just know that the conversation hasn't ended here. You can catch me every Sunday on AM 950 here in Minnesota, and always on YouTube on AM 950, but also on my YouTube channel, which is do.different.better.com. I can't wait to hear from all of you. Let me know how things are going. Let me know what's working. Let me know what landed. Send me a DM on Instagram. Send me something, a DM on LinkedIn, or post something in the comments on the YouTube channel. I definitely want to hear from you. I want to know what's working, what's not working, what's landing for you, what's not landing for you. But I can't wait to see you next time when we do different better together.